Alright guys, so we got another bike to work on. This is a 2006 Gsxr 600, so this should also work for a 750 and other years as well. And I'll show you the issues we're having on this one after the intro. So keep watching guys. So this is what we got going on so far. We turn on the bike, crank the switch. Right now we don't hear any power going to the fuel pump, so you already know what's not gonna happen. It's not gonna start. So that's the main issue we got going on. We need to figure out why the fuel pump's not turning on. So the first thing I'm planning to do is obviously remove the seat. To remove the seat on this specific model is 2 screws. One screw on this side and another screw on the other side. And this seat should come right off. Alright, so the next part we're going to do is take off these plastic trims on the side of the tank. And usually the back side is Velcro. You pull out and pull back. The reason I say pull back, there's usually a tab here, but as you can see, this one's broken here. And it hangs on to this part right here that's connected to the tank. And to take these off on both sides is the exact same way. And just to give you an idea of what it's supposed to look like, this is the tab I was talking about, so just make sure you pull back. Once you got the seat off and those 2 plastic trims, you're gonna go to the front and take this one bolt off. So now that we got that bolt taken out, now we can have access to lift this tank up and get better view on the fuel pump. But before I continue on guys, I forgot to mention, it's best to check the fuses first because it could save you a headache. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you check your fuses before you go any further into tearing down your own bike. And as you can see, just like that, we got the tank up and we got access to the fuel pump. So the next thing we're gonna do is dive into the actual electrical connection. What I'm gonna do is connect power directly to see if the fuel pump kicks in then. If it still does not kick in then at that point, I know for a fact the fuel pump's gonna be a problem. But the first thing we got to figure out is what wires need power, and I'll also give you that information here. Okay, so looking at the schematics, it has 3 wires coming from the fuel pump. Yellow red, which is YR, BW, which is black and white, which are the only ones that we need to worry about. So we're going to be putting power on the yellow red and grounding out the black and white. And if the fuel pump doesn't kick on then, well, that answers that problem. The fuel pump is the issue, and then we'll move on forward from there. So we're going to connect power to the red and yellow, and then we're going to ground out the black and white, and we should hear the fuel pump prime. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm using a power probe to make things a lot easier. Now, when I push the button, it should give power to the fuel pump and we'll hear it prime. Power is going to the fuel pump, but nothing's happening. So what does that mean? The fuel pump's bad. So the next thing we are going to do is now remove the fuel tank completely. And the way we do that is obviously we disconnect our electrical, which is one connection here, and we got to disconnect the fuel pump line. And the way that gets removed, on both sides there's this green tab. All you got to do at the very end, as you can see where my finger's pointing, is push in on both sides. And there you have it. It's removed. Be very careful you don't bend this line, because if you do cause a kink in it, you're gonna have to replace it. You're gonna have all kinds of issues being on the road, and the bike's just gonna act all kinds of ways. And be sure you don't damage this clip. Now once you do that, you usually have 2 gas lines that are connected to the bottom of the tank. Just disconnect those. Now the last part to get the fuel tank off is just to get that Allen bolt out. Once you get that Allen bolt out, the fuel tank should come right out. My recommendation is drop the fuel tank first, then pull the bolt out, and then you can easily take off the tank after that. Alright, so if you have a full tank just like I did, go ahead and open the cap on top and let all the gas drain out. Make sure you have a container or something you can put the gas in. You don't want that spilling all over the floor. If your tank for any reason has been repainted and it's not painted professionally, be careful. It will eat the paint depending on how that paint job was done. I'm willing to bet that fuel pump is pretty rusted. We're gonna go ahead and remove these 5 bolts, and they're all Allens. Once that comes out, I'm gonna remove this fuel pump and see what we got going on in there. I already had a feeling that it was going to be pretty rusted out the way the gas was looking, and I've actually seen worse than this. We're going to clean this whole thing up, but all we're going to do is replace the actual fuel pump, which isn't that much. It should be anywhere between 50 to 80 bucks. But obviously, if it's way worse than what I'm looking at now, then I highly recommend you replace the whole thing. In this case, I think I'm gonna be okay. Either way, we'll figure it out once we replace it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start tearing this down. Therefore, we get the old fuel pump out and we can start cleaning this pretty good. All right, so we're gonna start by removing the 2 screws on each side. One there, and the other one on this side, as you can see there. Then after that, we're gonna go ahead and disconnect these 2 wires. Now, don't get these mixed up. they do matter where they go. As you can see, black goes on this side and the red goes on this side. If for any reason you forget how these go, just play back on this video and you can see where they were supposed to go. Make sure you get the right screwdriver for these screws. If you get the incorrect one, you're gonna end up stripping that out, and then you're gonna be here a lot longer than you should be. The other thing is you're gonna have to find some replacement screws, which is not a big deal, but if you're like me and just wanna get it all done now, just take your time and do it right. So once you take these two wires off, be aware there's two washers. One star looking one that goes on the bottom of it, and the other one that's a regular washer that sits on top of it. So just keep in mind not to lose those. Now after that, you can stick a screwdriver between the plastic and the metal and you should be able to pry up. But before you do that, be aware that on the sides where those screws came out, they have these metal brackets. Do not lose them. As soon as you pull up on that, most likely they're gonna pop off. We're gonna go ahead and stick our screwdriver in there and slowly, carefully pull up. And there you have it. Now, as you can see, that is a very nasty filter. So when we replace this fuel pump, it's gonna come with the new fuel pump filter. So we're gonna go ahead and replace that and that as well. And as you can see how bad that looks inside. Now, however, the gas tank does have a little bit of rust, but it's not as bad as the fuel pump looks. So the next part we're gonna dive into is remove these two plastic clips on both sides, one there and one on the other side. Use the same screwdriver you used to pry it up. Just be very careful and gentle with it. Now at that point, you should be able to simply pull this filter out. Once you remove that filter, some fuel still might be in there. So just keep in mind, you might make a little bit more of a mess. Pull down on this fuel pump and it comes right out. And this is the part we will be replacing. While you're already this far, just inspect that gasket to make sure there's no rips or tears in it. If there isn't, you should be good. Don't worry about it. And I do not remember if the new fuel pump comes with this plastic container. So if it doesn't, just keep this on the side in case you need it again. We got it way cleaner than it was before. It's not perfect, but it's good enough to put back in. We got our brand new fuel pump that we'll be putting back in, some hardware in the wiring harness, and most importantly, the new fuel filter. The fuel pump comes with these rubber caps. Make sure you remove them before you start putting all this back together. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, just be sure that you check that gasket, that there's nothing wrong with it, and that it's still intact and in place. So to start, I'm gonna be putting the new wire harness in. Now, if on your old pump, yours is still pretty good, you could just simply disconnect it and use it on the new one. But in my case, it looks pretty corroded. I don't want to take a chance, and plus one of the wires already just came off really easy. Remember to remove that plastic piece if you still had it on yours. You're gonna need it on the new fuel pump. Now, in case you're wondering how this plastic piece sits, just make sure that the spot that has a point faces towards the harness and the other piece sits right on the outer casing of the fuel pump. Now all we do is slide it in, make sure it's in the correct position, and we got our fuel pump in. All right, moving down to the fuel filter. It's pretty much just one-way fit. As you can see, it has a slot and there's a hole on the plastic. Just insert it carefully. Don't put too much force into it. And it should be sitting flush with the bottom of the fuel pump. Then we have this rubber piece that just sits right in here. If you're wondering which way this goes, the part that should be sticking up is these two bubble looking spots. Don't worry too much about forcing it down because that's what this next piece is for. Now, as you can see, those two spots, they insert right in here. Once that is on correctly, just push down, let those clips clip in. And that's it. We got the bottom part fully on and ready to go. Here's another gasket you got to be aware of. Just keep an eye on this gasket as well. Make sure there's no cracks or rips or it's not missing. Make sure you scrape the surfaces on these areas pretty good for it can get a better contact once you put it back together. And also on these spots as well, because we do have two screws that connect to here that ground out on the bottom of the assembly. Now we're going to make sure those two brackets on both sides align correctly in the slots, starting off with the longer side, because as you can see, you have a long side here and a shorter side there. Once you have them in the slots correctly, just slide in slowly and just be very careful pushing this part in where the gasket sits. You don't want to mess up that gasket. It should slide all the way down to where you see the top where the screws go. All right, so now moving on to these two connections here. Don't forget the three pieces that go on this part. First, you put this little star washer on there first, then go ahead and put your wire, then the little washer that was on top, and then you put the nut on there. Do the exact same thing on the other side. Now, before putting this back in, just make sure all your wires are on one spot and not getting in the way in front of the floater, because if one of the wires get caught on this, you most likely won't get accurate readings. If you're low on fuel, you will be getting stuck on the side of the road. We got our ground wire on both sides. In case you get confused on which one's power and which one's ground coming from the fuel pump, just hold your fuel pump exactly how I have mine right now, and the left side is your power side and the right side is your ground side. Most likely there won't be nothing wrong with the gasket here, but just double check to make sure if you need to replace it or not. Now, when putting back the fuel pump, be very careful how you place it in. You don't want to bend your floater. Once you got the fuel pump in, if you're wondering which way this goes, you're staring at the tank upside down, it's gonna go to your left. So just make sure you put it on the right spot the first time. Otherwise, you're gonna have to unbolt this, turn it to where it needs to be, and do it again. So once you got your fuel tank back on, obviously put some gas in the tank. And before you go right away to starting it up, just make sure you turn the key and let the fuel pump cycle a couple times. All right, so let's see how this turned out. Hopefully you get another running bike. Alright guys, so there you have it. She is running. Bike is back on the road. Just don't forget, before assembling all this back together, prime the fuel pump a couple times. Just make sure you don't have any gas leaks underneath. Then go ahead and reassemble everything. Go for a test ride. And this is going to complete this video. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you like what you see. I just opened up an Instagram account. Feel free to follow me. Good luck on your projects, and God bless everyone.